So as part of our continuing examination of the question, is the Sydney Trains network more of a rapid transit network or a commuter rail network, we'll be examining the system's map. And in particular in this video, what we're going to examine is interstation distance, and that's the distance between consecutive stations. Now, since rapid transit networks are supposed to be able to transport passengers around densely developed portions of an urbanized area, rather than merely bring them from far out hinterlands into the central business district in the morning and return them back to the far out hinterlands in the evening, you'd expect that stations in rapid transit networks are spaced closer together than those in commuter rail networks. So in this video, we're going to examine the spacing between stations in selected portions of the Sydney Trains rail network and compare them to interstation spacing of both North American commuter rail networks and North American rapid transit networks. So first, we're going to look at the Eastern Suburbs and Illawarra line, also known as the T4 line. You can see it runs here from Bondi Junction through the Sydney Central Business District. And when it reaches Sutherland here, it splits into two different branches, one that ends up at Cronulla and one that ends up at Waterfall. So let's see how closely spaced the stations on this line are. So the numbering shown here on this Wikipedia link is the distance from Central Station. So Central Station is right here. So you'll have numbering in this direction as well as numbering in this direction. On the eastern portion, you'll see that Bondi Junction, which is the eastern terminus of the line, is 6.76, or it's the northeastern terminus of the line, is 6.76 kilometers east of Central Station. So this is Bondi Junction. From here to here is 6.76 kilometers. And in the branch toward Waterfall, so they share track until Sutherland, and then there's a branch toward Waterfall and a branch toward Cronulla. So up to Sutherland, you'll see that from Central Station we're 24.46 kilometers away. And you add the extra stations toward Waterfall, you get an additional about 14 kilometers. Waterfall's 38.74 kilometers from Central Station. And it is a distance of 26 stations. Waterfall is 26 stations from Central. I already went ahead and counted. Or sorry, it's 26 stations from Bondi Junction. And the total trip is this 38.74 kilometers from Waterfall to Central, plus the 6.76 kilometers from Central to Bondi Junction. Waterfall to Central, Central to Bondi Junction. You add those two and you get 45.5 kilometers. So we have 45.5 kilometers for a 26 station trip. So the trip between Bondi Junction and Waterfall stations is 45.5 kilometers for a 26 station trip. That works out to about 1.71 kilometers between stations on average. Now let's look at the trip between Bondi Junction and Cronulla. Okay, so we have the shared segment up to Sutherland, which is here, and then the split. So we can see Sutherland is 24.46 kilometers from Central Station, and you can see Cronulla is 34.81, so roughly an additional 10.35 kilometers between Sutherland and Cronulla. So the total track distance between Cronulla and Bondi Junction is this 34.81 between Cronulla and Central. plus the 6.76 between Bondi Junction and Central. So that works out to 41.57 kilometers for a 28 station trip, which is an average interstation distance of about 1.48 kilometers per station. So significantly shorter than the waterfall segment, which was 1.71 kilometers per station. So let's compare these average interstation distances for the eastern suburbs and Illawarra line, which is this line shown in blue, to a rapid transit line in the United States. So I pulled up a map of the Chicago Transit Authority's subway and L system. We're going to be focusing on this particular segment of the blue line, which is called the O'Hare branch. It links Damon Station to the Chicago O'Hare Airport station. And the trip is a 12 station trip. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, counting from Damon Station. Here I've pulled up the Wikipedia page, and it states that this branch is 14.6 miles, which is 23.5 kilometers. So 23.5 kilometers for a 12 station trip. That works out to about 1.95 kilometers between stations on average. And you can see that that's quite a bit more than both of the T4 Eastern Suburbs and Illawarra line segments on the Sydney Trains network that we examined. And the blue line is a rapid transit line. In fact, it's one of the few rapid transit lines in the United States that runs 24 hours a day. Now let's look at the average interstation distance on another segment of the network. We're now going to be focusing on the segment between MacArthur Station and Cabramatta Station, which is on the T2 Airport Inner West South line, and the portion of it between Campbelltown and Cabramatta is also served by the T5 Cumberland line. The reason I picked this segment is it's kind of toward the end of the network. So we can see what the average interstation distance is when we restrict ourselves toward the periphery of the network. Okay, so here I pull up the Wikipedia page for the Airport Inner West and South line. You can see the distances from Central Station here. MacArthur Station is 56.7 kilometers from Central Station, while Cabramatta is 28.4 kilometers from Central Station. So between the two, you have 28.3 kilometers of track. I just subtracted 28.4 from 56.7. And the trip is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 stations for an average interstation distance of 2.83 kilometers per station. And remember, this is towards the end of the network. Here I've pulled up a map of the DC Metro system so we can look at a somewhat analogous segment toward the end of the system and figure out the average interstation distance and compare it to the segment we just considered on the Sydney Trains network between MacArthur and Cabramatta. So we're going to be looking at the segment between Bethesda and Shady Grove stations. Unfortunately, there's no track distance data available, so I'm going to have to use Google Maps. What you'll see is, okay, here's the transit path, and here's the car path. So car, transit, essentially the same path. So the car path showed about 10.5 miles. If we assume the transit path is slightly more direct, we can say 10 miles, which is roughly 16 kilometers. And if I use 10.5, you get 16.6 kilometers. And the trip here is 6 stations. So counting from Bethesda, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you have 16.6 divided by 6, which is 2.77. And if we say that 10.5 miles was a slight overestimate because we use the driving distance and the track may be more direct, So we could say it's 10 miles and roughly 16 kilometers for 6 stations. We'll say it's around 2.67 kilometers per station. And notice the segment we considered here on the Sydney Trains network between MacArthur Station and Cabramatta Station, that was about 2.83 kilometers per station on average between stations. So 2.83, 2.67, those are not too far off. Now let's look at the very end of that strip between MacArthur and Campbelltown. You can see between MacArthur and Campbelltown it's 2 kilometers because MacArthur's 56.7 kilometers away from Central, while Campbelltown's 54.7. So that's a difference of 2 kilometers. And if we look at the end of that Bethesda to Shady Grove station segment, we have the segment between Rockville here and Shady Grove, which is analogous to the segment we just considered here between MacArthur and Campbelltown. Let's see the distance between Rockville and Shady Grove. Again, the track distance is not shown, but you can see here's the path of the train track, and here's the car path that Google Maps follows. They're roughly parallel to one another. The car path might be slightly longer, and Google Maps has it at 3.1 kilometers, or sorry, 3.1 miles, which is roughly 5 kilometers. So we have 2 kilometers in the Sydney train segment versus 5 kilometers in this DC Metro segment at the very end. So far it looks like the average interstation distances of the Sydney Trains network compare very, very favorably with even rapid transit systems in the United States. So let's see how these Sydney Trains interstation distances stack up against some commuter rail lines. So here I've pulled up a map of the New Jersey Transit Commuter Rail Network. And in particular, we're going to take a look at the Gladstone branch here, which you can see is one of the more compact lines. You can see that the stations seem more closely spaced together than, say, compared to the Northeast Corridor line, which seems to have some pretty big gaps between stations. I've pulled up the Wikipedia page for the Gladstone branch, and you can see the total number of stations is 24. So from the terminus to terminus, you'll be crossing 23 stations. And you can see the line length is 68.1 kilometers. So that's an average interstation distance of about 3 kilometers between stations. And remember, this is one of the more compact New Jersey Transit train lines. So going back to the Sydney Trains map, we saw between MacArthur and Cabramatta was about 2.83 kilometers between stations on average. But remember, this is the end of the segment. So toward the middle, say around here between Parramatta and Cabramatta, you can expect smaller interstation distances. But here we considered the entirety of the line, which includes the more densely clustered segments around here, as well as the more sparsely clustered stations here. And compared to this portion of the eastern suburbs and Illawarra line between Cronulla and Bondi Junction, it has the Gladstone branch, New Jersey Transit, has roughly double the average interstation distance. Here, you remember, it was about 1.41 kilometers between 1.48 kilometers between stations on average versus 3 kilometers in the Gladstone branch and New Jersey Transit case. So let's see how this Sydney Trains interstation distance compares against one more commuter rail system. So I pulled up a map of the Long Island Railroad system, and we're going to be considering this Port Jefferson branch here. It splits off the main line from Hicksville and runs all the way to Port Jefferson on Long Island's North Shore. You can see it's 10 stations. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Per this Wikipedia link, is 30 32.6 miles in length. So from Hicksville to Port Jefferson, Hicksville is where the split occurs. Hicksville to Port Jefferson is 32.6 miles because the mile marker Hicksville is 26.8. Port Jefferson is 59.4. We convert that to kilometers, we get about 52.5 kilometers for a 10-station route. So that's about 5.25 kilometers between stations on average. Which you can see significantly more than interstation distances we saw in the Sydney Trains network. So based on all the interstation distances we've examined in this video, we can see that the interstation distances of the Sydney Trains network are more along the lines of those of rapid transit systems in North America than they are along the lines of commuter rail systems in North America. And this just further strengthens the claim that the Sydney Trains network is more of a rapid transit network than it is a commuter rail network.